Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all back to the series where we'll be discussing finance and money matters from an Islamic perspective. In the previous episode, we went over some of the transactions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We spoke about the importance of wealth in the life of a Muslim. And we mentioned that a Muslim looks at wealth as a wasila, a means in order to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In some authentic ahadith, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam informs us that there were certain upright business people who attained the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and one of them was promised Jannah on more than one occasion because of how he used his wealth. Inshallah, in this episode, we'll be going through these ahadith. In Sahih al-Bukhari, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam informs us that from the previous generations, there were three people. On one occasion, they went out. As they were out, a storm came, so they took shelter in a cave. As they were in the cave, a boulder came and blocked the entrance to the cave. They couldn't come out. So they all realized that it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who can save us from the affliction we are currently in. So they start to make dua. As for the first person, he says, "Oh Allah, I had elderly parents. Every time I would bring milk, I would make sure that nobody drank before them. On one occasion, I came home with the milk and they were asleep. I didn't want to wake them up and I didn't want anybody to drink before them. So I waited and waited and waited until they got up, until they woke up, and they then drank the milk." He says, "Oh Allah, if I did this deed solely for your sake, help us in the affliction we are in." And the boulder moved a little bit. Notice how this person was good to his parents. The second person says, "Oh Allah, I had a relative of mine. She was pretty and I loved her so much. I wanted to commit zina with her. However, she refused. Later on, a time came where she was in need of the wealth. So I told her, commit the sin and I'll give you the wealth." So she came. Before we were about to commit the sin, she said, "Oh Abdullah, O servant of Allah, fear Allah. You should not be doing this." And she said, "Ya Abdullah, O servant of Allah, fear Allah. Don't commit the sin." He says, "And I left the sin at that moment, O Allah. And whatever wealth I gave her, I didn't take it back. O Allah, if I did this solely for your sake, help us in the affliction we are in." And the boulder moved a little bit more. However, they were still unable to come out of the cave. Now look at the third person, and I want you to ponder over the third person. He says, "Oh Allah, I used to employ people. And on one occasion, there was a person who left his wage with me." In some narrations of the hadith, it's mentioned a few grains of rice or a few grains of maize, etc. He says, "I took these grains and I began to grow them. In our terms, I invested them. Eventually, the crops grew. After selling the crop, he was able to buy livestock. He was able to buy sheep and camels, etc. Eventually, years later, this person who used to work for him came and he said, 'O servant of Allah, fear Allah and give me that which is mine.' And he replies and says, 'All the wealth that you see in this valley between the two mountains, the livestock, the sheep, the camels, etc., it's all yours. It belongs to you.' This person was amazed. He was shocked and he said, 'Are you joking with me?' And he says, 'I'm not joking with you. It's all yours.' The person making dua says, 'Oh Allah, he took all the wealth. He left nothing behind. Oh Allah, if I did this for your sake, help us in the affliction we are in." And the boulder moved and they were able to come out. Ponder over how the third person was an upright an honest employer. He didn't shortchange his people. He was just and fair, and in fact gave more to the person who worked for him. And when he needed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala most, his dua was accepted. He called out to Allah, asking for the help of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to his dua. Also an important point to mention when speaking about this hadith. Imagine you were the third person. The first two have made dua, the boulder has moved a little bit, and you're still unable to get out. If you had to make dua, what good deed would you have told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about? Do you have a good deed which you know you've done solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If not, then this is your opportunity to have at least one secret good deed between you and Allah that nobody knows about, because a time will come in this world or the next, in the hereafter, where you're most in need of the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And bi'idhnillah, due to this good deed you carried out with full sincerity, solely for the sake of Allah, you'll find that you will be helped bi'idhnillah. In another hadith recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, when the angels of death came to take the soul of a person from the previous nations, he was asked, did you do any good deeds? Do you have any good deeds? And he replied, I don't know myself to have done any good deeds, except that I was a person who had wealth. In some narrations of the hadith, it's mentioned, he says, as for those who were wealthy, when they struggled to pay back, I would give them more time to pay. Or when they came with whatever wealth they came with, even if it was less, I would forgive them. And as for those who were unable to pay, I would forgive them altogether. I would look over that which they owed me. And it's mentioned in the hadith that because of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him. So look at how, when being kind, when being upright and honest, when being easygoing on the people, you attain goodness in this world, and bi'idhnillah, as this person attained the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So hopefully you'll also attain the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third hadith I'd like to touch on is regarding Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu, one of the Khulafa al-Rashidun. On many occasions he was promised Jannah by the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. On 3 of these occasions, it was due to him using his wealth in the correct way, in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the Muslims came to Medina, they didn't have water, and the person who owned the well was charging exorbitant amounts for the people to get water. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, whoever is able to buy this well and give it for the Muslims, he will be given Jannah. Notice how the best generation are being told that if you're able to do this, you will be granted Jannah. Surely everybody wants to do the act of worship. Everybody wants to buy the well, but not everybody can buy the well. Only those who had wealth and the tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Uthman radiallahu anhu buys the well and he makes it a waqf for the Muslims, and they benefit from it. And because of this, he was promised Jannah. On another occasion, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, whoever expands the masjid, he will be granted a house in Jannah. Everybody wants to do it, but not everybody can, because they don't have the wealth. Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu buys the piece of land and he expands the masjid, and he's promised Jannah again because of how he used his wealth. On a third occasion, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, who will prepare the people for one of the campaigns they were going on? One of the campaigns. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, whoever prepares this army will be granted Jannah. Everybody would like to do it. Everybody wants Jannah, but not everybody can spend because they don't have the wealth. Uthman radiallahu anhu provides for these people and he's promised Jannah again. So look at how a upright and honest Muslim, even if they wealthy, if they use their wealth in a way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bi'idhnillah, you benefit in this world, bi'idhnillah, your du'as are closer to being accepted, bi'idhnillah, you attain the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and bi'idhnillah, because of how you use this wealth, you will be entered into Jannah. In the next episode, we'll be touching on zakah and sadaqah, compulsory charity as well as voluntary charity. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make charity compulsory upon the Muslims? Who pays charity? Does a person who has any amount of wealth pay charity, or are there certain threshold, certain rules when it comes to this charity? Also, on what wealth does a person pay zakah on? Is it on all your possessions, on your house, on your car, or is it limited to certain types of wealth? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the ability to understand and ponder over the verses of the Quran that speak about buying and selling, as well as the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and may He grant you all halal and pure wealth. Ameen.